Good afternoon to our listeners. Today we have a special guest episode here for you all. We are honored and welcome to introduce Adam Swart, who is the founder of Crowds on Demand, the original paid protesting firm. For over a decade, he has organized campaigns across the political spectrum and is recognized as one of the nation's leading experts on how protests are actually built, funded, and staged to shape political opinion. Adam now speaks out as a strong advocate for free speech and due process, warning how foreign funders and elite donors are hijacking authentic activism for political and financial gain. Adam, thank you for joining us today. And I'd love to get started by talking about the birth and evolution of Crowds on Demand. And you launched Crowds on Demand in 2012 during the Occupy the Wall Street era. What sparked that idea, and what gap in advocacy did you see and that you wanted to fill?
Yeah, thanks so much, gentlemen, for having me on your podcast. And it's such a good question because the Occupy Wall Street movement happened early on in my college career. And at the time, we have to put ourselves in that time of Occupy Wall Street of where, the financial collapse, we were in a recession, you had highest unemployment rates since the Great Depression, right? This was a very different America than the America that we're in now. And amidst this, I was working on a lot of Democratic Party campaigns. I definitely consider myself an independent now and work with liberals and conservatives, and a lot of times with people who are not either of those things. It's a business matter. Yeah. But then, so I started working on a lot of Democratic campaigns, and I, like many people my age, were kind of blamed the Republicans for a lot of those policies, that led to the financial collapse. So that was kind of the context. So working on a lot of these campaigns, though, you saw the people who ran the campaigns in the early 2010s, a lot of them, they were in college in the 60s and 70s when there was a peak activism movement. So they could get 5,000 students out on the quad just by putting a flyer out there. Yeah. So they would tell me, Adam, I managed a lot of things in Southern California. They said, Adam, get us 10,000 students at this rally, next week. And I was like, guys, I don't think it's going to work that way, right? Like, the people have a lot more competition for entertainment and for things to do. But I saw the benefit really of being able to turn out people. So where it generally wasn't kind of to that extent, even if you could bring out a few hundred people, it could make a huge difference. And conversely, if you brought out protesters, like let's just say you had an opposing candidate doing a rally with 1,000 people and you had 10, 15 protesters, even not even that many, you could get media coverage and you could essentially take over the media coverage of the opponent's rally. So instead of the headline being about the opponent and, their rally, it'd be about, the protesters are upset at this candidate for some comment that they said. So you're actually able to change the narrative, and it's so effective. But I would always say, why is the pay on these campaigns so bad, right? So I got to thinking, we're delivering hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in what they call earned media, which is what you'd have to pay to get that if you wanted to buy ads, right? And yet we're getting paid, minimum wage, basically. So I got to thinking, there has to be a business around this, right? And at the time I lived in LA, so my first thought was actors, right? So you have a ton of out-of-work actors who work kind of gig jobs. What if I just hired actors to, come into these political events or any other kind of event, audiences, whatever. So that's how it started. I was like, let's just get a lot of these actors who are working as valets and waiters and put them to work as crowd members, fill rooms and be protesters and whatever. And we'll get to kind of the ethical argument around that later, because it's a part of the business that we've changed over the last several years, where we'll use actors for PR stunts, but we now focus on providing activists who are actually interested in the cause. When we started the business, it's sort of like, hey, if you had a pulse and knew how to yell and scream, we would get you out right there, But we changed our business model a little bit, which has been both good and bad, honestly. But good in terms of our ethics.
Yeah.
But that's how the whole thing started. And I started it with just a few $1,000, just started a website, started emailing a ton of people, started emailing members of the media to advise them like this service was available. And I was kind of hoping that to get negative publicity about it, because thinking that the negative publicity would essentially help me, Kim Kardashian style.
Yeah. Right? Any publicity is good publicity.
Yeah.
Well, when no one knows about you, then that is definitely the case.
Yeah.
So, and that is kind of exactly what happened. We got a lot of publicity within like 2 weeks of launching the service, right? And that helped us obviously get a ton of clients and then build from there, and obviously expand from LA to New York, and then now we work nationwide and even on occasion internationally.
Yeah, and that's great, because I actually did work. I've worked for campaigns before over in PA. I went to school over in York College, Pennsylvania.
Oh, there you go.
Worked on a 2 congressional campaigns, so I am understanding of that level of campaign staffers not being paid, and how your model is kind of a cure for that, being able to get large crowds out to, whether it's opposing gatherings for another candidate or PR situations, as you were saying. And
you're so right. When you've worked local elections, even getting 20 people out there it can be tough when it's a congressional candidate or something. So you want to do a meet and greet in a diner, but no one's there. And then what you're looking for, especially in this era, maybe less so in 2012, but definitely in this era, is not just to do the meet and greet, but you want to have that on social media. You want to amplify that on local news.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time it was more local news. Now it's social media. But if no one shows up, so if you don't have the physical presence, then you're not going to have that visual to be able to amplify.
Yes, and that's without a doubt correct. Like, as speaking on my experience working with the state legislature in Philadelphia, when we would have events, and they were important events, let's just say for during the winter time for the LIHEAP program, which is for weatherization of homes and so forth.
Yeah.
We would usually get a large turnout. So what we did, obviously, we just went knocking on doors and so forth. Like, come on, we need large turns on there. We would hit our community organization groups to reach out to their individuals and so forth. So now that's a model that you've turned into now a business, which is very interesting. I really commend you for that. And your firm prides itself on nonpartisanship. As you were saying, you work with conservatives and Democrats. How do you stay neutral in such polarized world, given these past 9 months and 4 years under different presidencies?
Oh yeah, and it's very true. So yeah, we started under Obama, right? So we had Obama, Trump 1, Biden, then Trump 2, right? And one of the priorities is, I don't consider ourselves mercenaries in the sense of, okay, we'll work for the same side of different sides of the same issue. We've never done that in our history, but part of it is also having a set of what I like to say common sense values. And we like to do campaigns when possible that align with what I consider common sense values, which is things that 60, 70% of people support, but a vocal minority, sometimes that minority is on the left and sometimes that minority is on the right, is resisting it. We're actually, one misnomer of us is that we cater to, small minority views. We actually oftentimes cater to the views of the silent majority that doesn't show up. So if you there are a lot of issues where you have the 10%, they're at every city council meeting, every supervisor's meeting, every public hearing, yelling and screaming, but actually 80% of people want the other thing. And we're often paid by sort of moneyed interests within the 80% to say, hey, we want to turn out people on our side, but the people on our side have jobs and they have families. We need to just provide them that incentive and your kind of way of doing it. So I actually feel like generally I'm a vehicle for majority views. Sometimes that's right, sometimes that's left. And in many cases that has nothing to do with the political party of it, because a lot of issues are nonpartisan. The other value is I try to have the same value as like a news channel might when they take an advertisement. So, like ABC News, I'm not even going to bring ABC in it. Obviously, we have ABC.
Yeah, we have the
Kimmel thing. So, but if I'm a news channel, I might take a conservative ad or I might take a liberal ad, but I'm not going to take a neo-Nazi advertisement, right? Because that's kind of beyond the pale, right? Yeah. So there's certain things. Like one example is the issue of cryptocurrency. It wasn't an issue I was super well informed about when we started getting contacted about 7 years ago by cryptocurrency firms, and it wasn't one that I was 100% pro cryptocurrency, but we've worked with a ton of cryptocurrency firms and we've done a ton in this space to advocate for their perspective because it's a perspective that needs advocating for because the opposition, especially at the time, had all the institutional advocacy. They had the lobbyists, they had the lawyers, they had the bureaucracy on their side. So it was there are a lot of cases where I don't have to be 100%, but I think it's a cause that merits being advocated.
A minority voice, but that is an actual good cause.
Correct. And I like to say that if it's, as long as it's not a bad cause, then we will advocate for it because you deserve the right to speak, just like everyone deserves a lawyer, everyone deserves the ability to sort of have their views conveyed. The type of things that we really don't like to do are, so obviously anything that's hateful, right? And I don't share the Attorney General's view that there's free speech and there's hate speech. I think hate speech should be protected and must be protected because hate speech is, in my mind, what you think is hate speech might not be what I think is hate speech.
Yeah, so, slippery slope.
So it's a very slippery slope. However, it's my business, so I can determine for my business what I think is hate speech.
Yes, yep.
And there are causes that we wouldn't take on because they're hateful, and I think 99% of Americans would know what those causes would be, right? But then the other part is I don't like to bully people. I like to punch up. I like to protest CEOs. Punch being metaphorical in this era, I have to say that. But metaphorically, like we're talking about CEOs, we're talking about executives, board leaders, billionaires, politicians, not something that might be I don't want to target some conservative who might have made a racially uncouth remark or some drag queen on the left who might be saying some vulgar things, right? Like they are not the powerful. I don't want to target people, even if I think their views are silly. I don't want to target people for protest who don't have power.
Yeah, that's very, very noble. And, that completely makes sense on the model as well, because it doesn't make sense to apply pressure to groups that, really don't have that level of power, as you were saying.
Yeah, I don't want to bully people because that's all we'd be doing is trying to punish them for their views. And it's okay to be ill-informed, and I think those people can be persuaded perhaps, but ridiculing them actually tends to radicalize them. So if you're on the right and someone keeps calling you a racist and a bigot, right, it actually makes you more racist and bigoted, right? And if you're on the left and people are calling you tranny this and all the horrible things that have been directed at transgender people, is that going to make you more like questioning what the agenda is doing, or more like radical? So I tend to feel that persuasion is better.
Yeah, persuasion is definitely better, and that's what continue speaking on my experience. Like persuasion has always been the key to get to bring individuals on your side. And kind of speaking about those requests that you might have gotten from Republicans, Democrats. What's kind of the most unexpected request that you've gotten ever for a crowd, and how did you pull it off?
Well, one of the craziest ones has nothing to do with politics whatsoever. It was actually staging an entire wedding, like a really expensive wedding.
Oh, wow. Okay.
At probably one of the most expensive venues in the country. There was a very wealthy gentleman from abroad who was getting married to a girl who's, some might call her from the trailer park, right? I'm not insulting anybody, but that would be like
No,
what's
yes, yeah.
like
The
thing.
vibe you'd get from the woman.
That was the vibe that I got. And let's just say it's probably not the kind of girl that you'd want to bring home to mom and dad if mom and dad are billionaire businessmen, right?
Yeah.
So what we did was they said we need a crowd of people to be her sort of friends, her circle, to sort of instead of kind of maybe her actual friends in her circle, right? So we had people who kind of maybe look like the three of us, kind of young, professional type people, right? So we would, the three of us would probably be perfect in that group. So we had about, I think it was about 100, 150 people to be her group in this, you know. But then it got weirder as we got closer to the wedding, because about 2 weeks before they said, oh, we need some aunts, some uncles, some cousins.
Oh gosh.
Okay, now we gotta have the family. But a week before they said we also need the father of the bride. So we need someone to walk her down the aisle. And I was like, okay, so in this case, it's a white guy. I was like, we need a white guy, 60-ish years old. So I was like, this is going to be ridiculous. Like I told the guy, I was like, you're going to have to cry when you walk her down the aisle. That's what was, right? So we had everybody prepared with all these backstories on who they were, because I assumed that the family is going to be questioning them, like, okay, who are you? How do you know the daughter, whatever. Turns out none of them spoke a word of English. So all the preparation was completely unnecessary, actually.
Yeah.
But that was probably the weirdest one. And certainly it's not something we do every week.
Right.
No, that sounds like quite the event to partake in and set up. I can't imagine doing all that work just to realize that none of them even speak a word of English.
Yeah. No, never assume. You always do more preparation than you think. I've always found that, rather than less preparation, because you're never too prepared.
Oh yeah, that's like the golden rule in a lot of things. You never assume. Always, double check and do your due diligence before going into something. And now I kind of want to move into how paid crowds work. Looking at the mechanisms and impacts. So can you walk us through the process? When a campaign says we need a crowd, how do you make it happen? And from recruitment to execution, can you walk us through that?
Yeah, let's do it. So basically, first of all, we determine what the cause is, right? So in certain cases, the cause may be something that on its surface doesn't look sexy. So let's just say, for example, residents of a very wealthy community are looking to block some kind of renewable energy project because because it's going to impact their view. Right. So that's who hires us, right? Because these are people who maybe don't care about the environment, but they just don't want their view obstructed. Well, okay, that's not a very sexy narrative. So I have to do is say, okay, well, actually, what the real narrative is they're building this kind of power plant in an area with the endangered species. So, actually we have an environmentalist argument. So first of all, it's to turn a kind of a NIMBY cause into an environmentalist cause, right? Because no one really cares about rich people who don't want a power plant in their neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
So we have to turn it first and figure out what the most compelling narrative is. So that's just a hypothetical example. So then, now that we've made an environmental cause, we say, okay, well, we want environmentalists to do this, right? And part of it is also determining who is it that is empowered to reject this, right? So maybe it's the local city council has some power, but maybe there's some state board. Maybe the state legislature has something. I always say, the more you can muddy the waters and the more you can bring as many groups into it as possible, the better, because you never know exactly what the right lever is that will actually convince the person to not do the project, right? Because what you want to do in this case is kind of make whoever is going to build the project feel like this is going to be too expensive, too much of a pain in the butt, and ultimately have whoever is in charge reject it, right? So you want to bring in every possible group you can to bear. So you figure out, all of that to say is you figure out who the targets of our advocacy are, right? and then you figure out what mechanisms you're going to use, right? So protest, yes, but maybe phone calls, maybe
Yep.
emails, right? Maybe you also combine that with some kind of lobbyist inside approach, right? Maybe you find what the circles are, right? Maybe you're also lobbying the company, right? So maybe the power company has a board of directors, and we're also calling the board of directors. We're calling, we have a protest outside one of the directors' country clubs, for example, right? So you're increasing the cost of the advocacy, right, of what they're doing, because now it's like, okay, you're taking it right to them and saying, we don't want this, right? And now the environmentalists are protesting at the country club. So you're taking it. We used to actually do more protests at people's homes, but we've tried to shy away from that. That's another part of the ethics thing that I've been trying to do, is like, hey, look, people's home, it's a sensitive location. It's different if it's a billionaire's like mansion. It's different, but if it, like, that's fair game. But I think if we're talking about like an individual private residence, it's different. And I don't like, we've done a lot of protests there, and we don't really want to do that in the future. Like, country clubs are much better anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Sends a message almost.
Exactly. So places like that. So you figure it out. Obviously, maybe you have a ton of kind of prospective targets, but then obviously you have to work with the client to say, what kind of budget are we working with? And then we kind of optimize from there. What are the prime kind of focuses of our advocacy, right? After we've decided the budget, right? So it might be, okay, these are these city council people, these state assembly people, these board members. We're going to call these people and protest those people, right? And boom, we start this into place. Okay, then it becomes, okay, who are we going to use to carry out this advocacy? Okay, in this case, it's environmentalists, right? So we have people who are passionate about the environment. So they're people who are otherwise passionate about the environment, who agree on the idea of the power plant shouldn't be built. Again, they don't necessarily want to love the idea of working for some rich people worried about the view, but ultimately their objective is the same. So maybe what we compensate people for is so that they're dedicating their time to this, because people's time is valuable. And I hate when people are like, oh, people should just do all this stuff for free, because your free is different from my free. If you're a wealthy retiree, you can go to as many events and do as much advocacy as possible. But if you're a hourly worker at McDonald's, then that's not free for you. That means losing a day of work, paying childcare, all of that. So I think people should be compensated for advocacy, and it doesn't take away from it. So, okay, ultimately we kind of execute the strategy, right? We optimize it as necessary, right? So if we see certain people are saying, okay, I'm on board, right? Then we'll take the protesters and maybe move them to somewhere else because we've convinced them, right? And again, the purpose of protests, I always say, is to persuade. It's not to kind of in any way harass, it's to persuade. So the argument that protesters should be doing is to try to really convince people, not yell and scream. So part of it is to make sure that the protesters are equipped with all the right talking points so that they can convince people who may be on the other side, or in most cases, just simply have no idea, right?
Yeah. And that's the key piece of it. Like, as you were saying, it's about persuading. It's not about like having, an aggressive intent against, someone who's, protesting maybe an issue opposite of yours. It's just about having those key talking points that really can hit home and kind of persuade and change the minds of individuals that are on the other side of the aisle on whatever issue that you're protesting about. I think that's a very good way to really look at protesting. And then would you be able to share kind of like a political event where your crowd made a tangible difference?
Sure. Well, I'll give you actually something a little bigger, which is one of my favorite campaigns we've ever done, which is called Delete Facebook. You may have heard of it. So it was after kind of it came out that Facebook was misusing the customers' information. Customers, I mean, we're not really customers. We're really the product, unfortunately.
Yeah.
They say customers, but it's really, like people's information. And it was manipulated by to cause literally a genocide in the country of Myanmar, right, in Southeast Asia, but also used to foment kind of Americans hating each other, right?
Yeah.
And it really went to show kind of how evil the model was. There was consensus from the right and the left because what was beautiful about Delete Facebook is it brought the right and the left together because, left-wing people, they don't like corporations, right? The big multi-billionaire corporation, and they didn't like the fact that Facebook was used also to benefit Trump in 2016. But conversely, Republicans, they've never trusted Facebook. I mean, as far as they're concerned, this is Silicon Valley, it's liberals, California, right? So there was a real convergence of like everybody is like Zuckerberg and Facebook needs to change their act. And actually, we did so many of these protests and online advocacy and all of that it actually led them to change their name. They don't call themselves Facebook anymore. They go by Meta. And they also adopted one other change, which has made political advertising much, much more difficult. So again, I still hate their business model. I still think they need to reform like majorly, but all of them do. Twitter, Facebook, everything. But this was a step in the right direction, and it was important to do it because you see the impact that social media is having right now, and it's mostly like it's actually unequivocally a negative impact, right? Like the positive impacts are here, the negative impacts are here, right? It's not even close.
And I think that effort, being that catalyst to have, forcing basically Facebook to change their name to Meta, being, a part of that force, that is very, very impressive without a doubt. I didn't know that about Crowds on Demand was a part of that force against Facebook and Delete Facebook as well. Looking ahead with 2026 midterms looming, what kind of crowd requests have you been getting from campaigns or if campaigns have been starting to reach out?
It's a little early for that time. I think one of the big things that I think people don't know about our business is that we work more with causes than with candidates. So like most people think, okay, you're working for Kamala, you're working for Trump, whatever. But what we're actually doing is mostly pushing issues to the forefront and in front of those candidates, because what we're doing more often, not to say that we don't work with candidates, but more often we're working for an issue. Like we say, hey, we want safe streets, right? And we're going to push, Minneapolis has become super dangerous. We want to push all the candidates to push for safe streets. And maybe we'll push for the candidates who are anti-safety, and we're going to push for the candidates who are pro-safety. But ultimately, our focus is the safety issue, for example, right? So that would be like kind of more of what we do. So the 26th midterm is just kind of getting started. So I don't really know what role we're going to play. I'm sure we will, but it's a little too soon to have a full idea of that. But I'll tell you what I want to do in that context is I want to play a role for common sense policies and pushing, again, the kind of basic policies that most of us want, which is no more lawfare, right? Whether it's Republicans or Democrats. Like, I'm tired of this whole, like, we're going to put you in jail. We're going to put you in jail, right? Like I think Biden took it to another, like a bad level by going after Republicans, but I think Trump has taken it like even like too far. With now, I mean, it's gone too far. So no lawfare, no attacks on free speech, right? Like, I think, again, we've had left-wing cancel culture, but now we have this right-wing wokeism that is coming out around, where you're trying to get people canceled and you have the lists. So like, it's the same thing that they're acting like the blue-haired lefties, you know what I mean? With all the lists and saying, they said something that hurt our feelings. We be fired. I mean, like that's exactly what they've accused the left of, correctly so. But don't like, So most Americans want free speech. Most Americans agree, like rightly, that somebody can be a doofus, but still should have the right to speak their
Yeah,
mind.
yeah, yeah,
I
we
want
spoke about that.
safety, right? Like I think we all agree we've got too much crime on the streets of our cities. We got to clean that up, and whatever the reforms that have been taking place have not worked. They have not made our society safer or more just. We need safe streets, but that doesn't have to that doesn't conflict with responsible law enforcement who are held accountable if they abuse the trust, right? So those things actually go together, right? If you fund law enforcement really well, but then also let them know, like any other employee, if you are going to are brutal for no reason, you're going to be held accountable for that, as you should be.
Yeah.
But I think most of us agree with that. I'll admit I'm a big train fan. I want more public transit. I want more trains. I think most Americans, I know a lot of people. Actually, I traveled recently with someone who was very, very MAGA to Europe. And this person is very hardcore MAGA, but they were like, oh, I love how you can just take a train everywhere. It's like, this is great. We got to get Republicans on board with the train stuff. So with public transit. So these are kind of the things that, like, I think 80% of Americans kind of like this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, we want education that is focused on the basics. Like, we don't want the kids taught Christian nationalism, and we don't want them to be taught about, you know,
LGBTQ theory.
Either, you know, like let's not. We don't have to teach. It's not like, why are we constantly having to choose between being forced down our throat with the Christian nationalism, or forced down our throat with the far left LGBT agenda? Like, I think most Americans just want their kids to learn real stuff. I mean, it's so funny. I was always the kid who would always try to get out of assignments as a kid. So I kind of almost wish I was a student at this age, because I could be like, oh no, sorry, like, I'm not doing the math homework. Math is racist. Sorry, I'm not doing this. Jesus wouldn't have wanted this. Like, I would have totally manipulated all of the systems to try to get out of doing my homework. Like, I would have never had to do any of this stuff. Like, the kids these days have so many ways to like to excuse like not having to actually like learn the material, which is like probably what we should be doing, because I guarantee you across the ocean in China, the kids are learning math. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was going to say, especially nowadays with like the school being extremely digital, laptops, phones being extremely normal. We got Chat GPT coming out, so we got kids using that just to cheat left and right, not even actually studying.
Oh yeah.
It's there's been a big push for, you know, like you're saying, common sense things, like the idea of not having phones fully accessible during school, and stuff like that.
Like, of course you don't have phones. Of course you can't have like a phone in class. Like, why on earth should that should be locked up till 4 p.m.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yep. And I kind of also think that I agree with, like, I'm a very strong for free speech, but I am sympathetic with Utah's kind of desire to ban social media for kids.
Yes. Yeah.
And for adults, I like the idea of like a 1 hour time limit. Like, I think like just 1 hour a day, like just keep it to an hour. You know, I'm not saying no social media, but what are you getting from anything beyond an hour, right? Because even the benefits that pro social media people cite, okay, I can chat with friends, have my interests, whatever. Yeah, you can do that, but an hour, any more than an hour, it's like, it's too much.
I mean, there's a ton of studies that show quite literally the more time you spend on social media, the higher anxiety gets, the higher rates of depression get. It's literally like a poison pill that you take almost.
And even with Chat GPT, like there have been multiple studies coming out, honestly, monthly studies, I believe, just about stating that individuals that continually use AI for, simple tasks and so forth, their critical thinking capabilities shrink throughout, the time frame that they're using. So it's actually, making individuals think critically less. So it's not really helping out the overall population. That's also kind of why you're starting to see, coupled with COVID, a lot of states and schools reporting poor standardized test numbers as well as school numbers for middle-aged children all the way up to high school. Really.
Yes. So, so to your question, basically, I want to work on common sense issues surrounding the midterm. I don't want to shill for Republicans or Democrats necessarily. If Republicans and Democrats are on common sense, I want to push common sense issues, and I want Democrats and Republicans to try to compete for who's going to actually. I want them to compete for common sense rather than to compete for the Looney Tune fringes of the party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
Like, hey, those guys.
That's a problem, and I feel like the candidates are increasingly focused on fringe issues and preaching to the base.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's like you shouldn't be arguing that side's so crazy. We might be crazy, but they're not as crazy as us. You should be arguing, well, this is what we can actually offer that fixes the problems you guys are dealing with, which we sadly do not see as much as we should.
They don't care, obviously, but
they don't.
That's okay. The founding fathers didn't expect them to care, but they did expect us to hold them accountable for not caring.
Yeah.
So the thing is, the genius of our constitutional system is it doesn't actually rely on the goodwill of people. It actually only relies on the fact that Americans hold their own government to account and then hold them accountable for their views. So George Washington, Franklin, Madison, Hamilton, they were smart guys. They were under no delusions that congressmen would be any different than the ones that we see today. They knew they were power-hungry grifters, right? That's who these people are. However, what they do expect is incumbent in the system is that people advocate and demand and insist that these people actually serve the needs of the people and hold them accountable at the ballot box if they don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, I think as 2026 starts shaping up and candidates start officially announcing that they're running, we would definitely look to actually bring you back on to have further conversation about how things in 2026 have been for crowds on demand. Let's say like the middle of the year and so forth, as elections are going on and so forth. We could definitely bring you back on. We would love that as well. And I want to move over to the ethics debate, because I know that's going to be a real important piece here. So critics have called paid crowds astroturfing and say they erode trust in democracy. How do you counter those levels of critique?
Well, I think it's natural that, number one, every side is trying to always delegitimize the other side, right? And so number one, to understand that a lot of times when people try to assail the other side as paid crowds, you're trying to use, if someone received money, as a way to delegitimize their views, when it should not serve to delegitimize their views. If you're a MSN, like Rachel Maddow gets paid tens of millions of dollars. Tucker Carlson gets paid tens of millions of dollars, right? And no one, what I don't understand is no one questions whether they are sincere in their views. And yet one of my protesters gets a couple $100 to show up at a rally, and suddenly, they don't care about the issue, right? For a couple $100, but somebody for millions of dollars, Rogan with like a 9-figure contract, those people somehow are like genuine. I don't fully understand that. So number one is to understand that the amount of money that we pay people is enough to cover their expenses and for the opportunity cost of attending it. As I said, if you're a McDonald's worker, childcare, whatever, so whatever you would have made in your other job, assuming you're not like a patent lawyer or something, we're covering you what you're going to make in your other job. We're going to cover your expenses, but it's not so much that like it's going to make you betray your convictions, right? So if you are someone who considers yourself a supporter of, BLM in that point of view, are you going to go to a MAGA rally for a couple $100? I really don't think you would. And vice versa. So I think it doesn't pass the smell test, honestly, this concept that it should erode trust, because I think that shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what the model is. As I described too, we've shifted away from actors and we're focusing on having people who are like engaged in the subject. So of course, if you're an actor, that's fine, but you also have to be someone who's passionate about the subject. So again, it's like we're paying you to show up in favor of your views, and part of it is in this environment right now, we have actually a very low unemployment rate. So part of it is when we started this company, in 2012, we were in a perspective where people were very, very desperate for money, and people may have even gone to things that they disagree with because they really, really needed the money badly. Yeah. We're right now in an era of actually like some of the record low unemployment. So in that era, I think most people who don't people aren't out there like so hungry for money that they're willing to betray their convictions. And though if those people are there, that tends not to be who we select for, because we're looking for people who are articulate. One thing that actually a lot of people don't know is that we vet every participant in the rally, any protest, with a 15-minute call, maybe 30 minutes per engagement. So especially if you haven't worked with us before and this is your first time participating, we tend to actually have like a 30-minute call where we vet you to make sure that you're passionate about the subject and you're also are passionate about our values of respectful, obviously peaceful, law-abiding discourse, right? Yeah. So, and that's what we attribute the fact that in 13 years of business, we've never had anyone commit a crime, never had anyone get hurt. We have like a pretty great record because of those business practices. So I think it's one of those things where you look at it from 30,000 feet, you're like, oh my God, paid crowds, that doesn't sound right. But when you actually track it actually like makes a lot more sense than you'd think.
Yeah, I think the way that you've unpacked it, for our listeners, gives them a more in-depth look to exactly how Crowds on Demand operates and how critics do call it unethical. But the way that you've explained it, levels out the playing field, and you're able to put your piece out there to let them know that, as you're saying about those individuals on MSNBC that are paid billions of dollars and seem like they care, that kind of brought my mind to a term like alligator tears, basically. It seems like they care, but they're crying and so forth. But on the backside, they're getting $10 million and so forth, and then they're just only supposed to be passionate about all these issues and so forth. It's like, and it's how can you actually be passionate about everything?
Why should the Republicans have an arbitrary set of issues and the Democrats have an arbitrary set of issues? But the reality is, someone can be very pro-choice, but also pro-law and order.
Yes.
And be, so they don't have to have the exact and they don't have to share the exact composition that one party or the other favors, but the parties are trying to make us work for them, and we don't work for them. We don't owe them anything. This is what I always tell everybody. It's like, I just want every American to say, I consider myself an independent, because parties have not done anything for us. They only serve themselves, right? And the more you declare yourself an independent, the better service you get from our politicians. Because if you say, I'm going to vote for you no matter what, I'm going to vote Republican no matter what, well, then look at why rural America is in the situation it's in. If you say, I mean, there's a meth epidemic, there's an oxycodone epidemic, fentanyl epidemic in our rural communities because the Republicans have taken them for granted. Conversely, look at urban America, right? Look at the neighborhoods that vote 90% Democrat. Walk on the streets of Compton and Watts that are 80-90% Democrat and see how much the Democrats care about their core constituents, right? So if you say you're 50-50, you get good service, and so if you say, hey, I don't owe you anything, but if you work for me, then I will support you, right? And that in the context of voting is something that more voters have to do, is like, look, you work for me, I do not work for you.
Yep, exactly. And that's what, like, when I was working in a legislative office, that's kind of like how I always felt. I never felt in the sense that like I'm not working for the people ever in the sense of working those 5 years there. It was always my job and what I do in representing the rep at certain events, or working to put together legislation and policy. Like, I'm doing this on the behalf of the people that have voted him into office, realistically.
Yes, I completely agree.
And I want to get into kind of like, with the technology phase, social media we've talked about, specifically social media bots and deep fakes. Yeah. How does a physical crowd still cut through the noise to shape voter and media perceptions?
I think, in fact, because there's so much noise online, that it actually makes the physical more important, because people show up less and less physically because they think online participation is enough. And which is why I think that actually showing up in person actually becomes more powerful.
Yeah.
Because we're just saturated with online stuff. I mean, I keep disabling. I don't have notifications on for most of my things, because they're constantly trying to buzz you, and everyone wants the access to the most personal part of your life, which is to send you a buzz every 10 minutes. Netflix, new show on.
Yes, all the time.
New podcast episode out. Except everyone should have notifications for this particular podcast, but every other podcast, no.
Thank you.
But it's a problem that we're facing. But I think actually turning up physically and having people out there physically actually has an increased power when we see the limitations of online. So I'll give you an example of limitations of online. So two members of the so-called squad, the progressive far left, Jamal Bowman in New York, and Cori Bush in Missouri, were actually primaried, so not by Republicans. So this is by a Democrat. So these people, both Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, have millions of social media followers, are very well known. They're always on progressive media, right? Their opponents were only known within the area, the constituency, and both of them had like 2,000 followers on social media.
Yeah,
they were both successfully primary. Why? Yeah. Because they were on MSNBC, they're on Twitter, they're on Instagram, but their opponents were actually doing the work, meeting people, going door to door, going on the ground, what Jamal and Cori were too lazy to do, or felt that they did not need to do, right? So actually, it's the physical work. It's their online followers were useless when it came to actually the election. So I actually think people should think about the fact that these people with a lot of followers, it's kind of a paper tiger. There's actually a value of showing up in person.
It's a very good term.
I want to add a little bit to that as well, especially with how much bots are beginning to run through all of social media. There's the dead internet theory that seems to be more and more real every single day. And really gets to the point of, how many of these interactions on social media are actually real people? How many of these followers are actually real people? How many of these people that are, these accounts that are participating in these discussions, these debates and more, how many of them are actual, people behind a phone, American voters? That's the big one. American voters versus compared to people that are just internationally or doing XYZ for whatever reason. So when you're able to actually get that in-person turnout, you see, one, holy crap, this is actually a real movement. This isn't just something that's just online fueled by.
Exactly. Like these people online, they're from Pakistan or Bangladesh or whatever,
India,
right?
Israel, everywhere else.
You don't know where these people are from. And by the way, all of us anyone of us who has an online profile has a lot of bot followers. Like it's inevitable. Kim Kardashian's followers are bots. So you could have a lot of real followers, but also a lot of bot followers.
Yeah.
You just don't really know. And the reality is like there's so many ways to pay for that engagement, right? That's truly illegitimate engagement. The people from Bangladesh, they truly don't care. The people who compensated a couple $100 to show up in person are far more genuine than the person in Bangladesh paid, to like your campaign video.
Yeah.
No, I would full-heartedly agree. And Speaking about like kind of like the surging demand and recent controversies that have been there in the news, you've seen a massive surge and paid in demand for paid protesters. I believe it's a 400% spike in requested within 2025. So I want to ask, like, what's fueling this, and are there certain issues or parties driving this high level of trend?
I think everything is becoming more political and there's more emphasis on advocacy. So a lot of particularly well-to-do individuals who I think have been on the sidelines for a long time are getting involved. And that's probably overall a good thing for our business. I mean, it's a 400% surge in requests. That doesn't mean a 400% surge in business, because not all the requests are ones that we want to engage in. So I just want to be clear. And in particular, when I said that, that was in regards to certain areas. So it's not like across the board 400%. But yes, correct that you have a lot more people who have means are basically getting involved in politics. I mean, you can see that with the people around Trump. I mean, you have like I have seen like 10 events in the past like 2 months where Tim Cook has been like next to Trump. Where I'm like, feels like he's like stalking Trump. You know what I mean? But it's like but more and more business leaders are doing that, right? And are getting involved, right? And maybe a lot of them obviously on the more conservative side, maybe on the liberal side, but what I think a lot of business leaders are realizing is, number one, if you don't advocate for yourself and your business, then your competitors will essentially upend you and create a regulatory framework that is unfavorable to you. So essentially you have to play the game. Because I mean, so it's not necessarily an ideal thing, but it's a reality in our current system that essentially, if you're a business over a certain level, you basically have to be advocating for regulations in favor of you, or like deregulations in favor of you.
Yeah.
Or otherwise, someone else is going to do it, and it's going to end up you're going to be the loser in that game. So part of it is just a direct business situation, which is a lot of our customers. But in other cases, it's a lot of people who are just really engaged, and this is a period where a lot of people are like, wow, I want to advocate because there's so much going on. So I think that's what it's a combination of those two things is what I kind of attribute the increase in requests to.
Yeah, I definitely think across the board, with particularly these past 9 months, individuals have definitely felt a high resolve to want to go out and advocate on or protest on many issues. For myself, I currently work for the New Jersey Council of County Colleges as a policy analyst. They used to have a lobbyist, but now kind of morphed that into my new role. So it's more of the advocacy side of things. Yeah. So I do understand what you're saying with that, and even especially with trying to get individuals to turn out when every year we fight for $20 million in the New Jersey state budget, as well as with the federal cuts coming down. We're going to be fighting for those things in 2026. So it's interesting to hear what you're saying about the levels of advocacy and how people are willing to turn out more now, given the Trump administration these last 9 months. It definitely speaks to like experiences that I have been going through myself.
I love it.
Yeah, it's great.
As the saying goes, a squeaky hinge gets the oil. If you're not making noise, if you're not.
That's right. That's a challenge. So you basically have to advocate for yourself, because otherwise, essentially, unfortunately, that is how business works. And people, for the most part, I'm not someone who has fake nostalgia for the past of, in the old days, people were honorable. No, I think they were sharks in the old days too. But I think when I see it, I think we just have more knowledge of what people are doing. But if you don't advocate for yourself, business is business, right? You want to do things the ethical way, the right way. But in a dog-eat-dog world, you have to advocate for yourself. And especially as upstart business, Crowds on Demand is a great service, particularly for startup businesses or medium-sized businesses that need to advocate in more unconventional ways because they lack the ability to have, $50 million worth of lobbyists and lawyers,
So. Right. And I know we have just a few minutes left with you, and I want to kind of get into, the future of advocacy and regulation in your perspective.
Wait, but first, I just wanted to quickly
Yeah.
say I've actually got to hop off the call. I'm
Oh, yeah,
Adam. It
that's
was a
right.
pleasure meeting you. Pleasure talking with you again to know more about Crowds on Demand, how you've gone about setting this all up. I do hope you get to join us again for another time, and hope both
Yes.
of you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take it easy, guys.
All right, take it easy, Muhammad.
Pleasure.
And Adam, as I was saying, I want to get into, the future of advocacy and regulations in your perspective. So you've called your work revolutionary in people's businesses. What's one change you'd love to see in how political advocacy operates going forward?
I think it more issue focused and less
Mm.
trying to tear down the motivation focus, right? And I think because I think we should understand, just as the founding fathers understood, is that people have ulterior motives for things, right?
Yes.
So I was talking earlier in this podcast about the constitutional form of government, which essentially takes into account the idea that the president is going to try to have more power for the president. The speaker should be trying to have more power for the speaker, right? Supreme Court, same thing. So each branch of government, each part of government, each party within government is going to try to take as much power as they can. That's natural and that's okay. But it's the idea of understanding that. So I think the idea that, okay, when you see a movement, when you see an ad, when you see any of this, you should kind of take into account that this is, there's money and there's power behind it, but to try to focus on, okay, instead of trying to say, oh, well, these protesters are paid, this movement is illegitimate, this ad is bought and paid for by this billionaire.
Yeah.
Okay, do you disagree with the ad? Why do you disagree with the ad? Do you disagree with the protest? Why do you disagree with the protest? Because essentially we could keep trying to delegitimize each other every single day, or we could actually have more issue focused dialogue. And the purpose of a protest is to basically push people to pay attention to an issue. It's not actually to manipulate the idea that, oh, well, this number of people care about it. I think anyone who's smart knows that the people who show up at a protest aren't necessarily representative of the broader swath of public opinion. It's a way to get attention. It's a mechanism. It's just like buying an ad. If I see an ad for Cheetos, does that mean everyone likes Cheetos? No, it means Cheetos took out an ad.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And kind of speaking to like looking at transparency when it comes to disclosing the actors for crowds and so forth when it's other campaigns and for other candidates. Have you seen kind of like a rise in the foreign connection and foreign funding of certain protesting and so forth?
Well, it's something that people should be worried about, especially if there's hostile foreign actors. I mean, we've worked with a lot of foreign companies advancing their interests in the United States and with disputes. But when it comes to a foreign country, especially a hostile foreign country, I think my advice is for people to be very careful with working with that. It's not something that we're kind of looking at so much now. I mean, unless there's a special case, because so at the end of the day, people should be concerned because those foreign countries are looking to use protests and in many cases illegal activities such as riots to create foment dissent and chaos in America, so that they can then amplify it on social media and within their state media that America is like some crappy country. Because what that does is that actually stifles dissent within those countries, because people in autocratic regimes look to United States for guidance and they say, oh, we want to have the beauty that America has. And then when they see that, oh no, America is actually terrible, and that's the images that they see of riots and, burning things, they're like, oh, well, maybe we don't want democracy, right? So it's actually like a tool to oppress their people. So I don't necessarily want to be a part of that. So, but I think transparency about foreign, I agree with, but transparency regarding paid participants or not, my only thing is, if you want to do that, then we all should have to put a post-it note for every reason why we're out something. I'm trying to impress a girl. I'm trying to social media. I'm trying to, I'm a political staffer because I'm there. As you know, from being a political staffer, a lot of the people at these protests or rallies are actually political staffers. So that's the thing, that you can't, it's really hard to unpack people's motivations. And Cash compensation is just one kind of motivation. So with that, I think we unfortunately have to wrap it, but it's been such a pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah, it's been a very thought-provoking conversation, on the behind-the-scenes operations of protest and advocacy. Adam, thank you again for joining us today and providing our listeners with this very unique perspective. And, to our listeners, I hope you're able to join us again, and I hope you were able to gain a lot of information from our guest today. And we do hope to bring him back on for the 2026 midterms. And Adam, thank you again.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. You have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.